And this will be recording for later too.
Yes, it will. You're live.
All right. Hello, good morning. I'm Emily Reed, Historic Preservation Program Manager with Cox McLean, now Stantec, and we're pleased to present this draft Historic Preservation Plan for Moberly to you today. Since 2003, Moberly's made historic preservation a priority when it created the Historic Preservation Program and adopted its Historic Preservation Ordinance. In 2010, the city adopted their first Historic Preservation Plan, which established a set of goals and priorities, and they've made a lot of progress towards achieving those goals. They retained our company in 2021 to update that plan for the next 10 years as we continue to work with the community to tell the unique story of Moberly and make sure that we're preserving important historic places in the community. So if you haven't already, you can download a copy of the plan, the draft plan, from the city's website. There's a link here. You can also type it into your browser. It's tinyurl.com/2022 Moberly plan. So for today, we're going to go over the draft plan, the schedule and next steps, including how you can comment on the document. We'd also like that you hold your questions until the end. We'll have the city making note of any comments or questions that come in, and then we will address those via a written process a little bit later on so that we can make sure we keep track of all the comments and get those addressed. This project was a team effort that involved both the public and private sectors. The city received a grant from the National Park Service through the Missouri State Historic Preservation Office to fund this plan. And then after getting the grant, the city retained our team to develop the plan. What is the Historic Preservation Plan? Preservation planning is a proactive way to provide for the protection of a community's historic resources and character. A community that includes preservation as part of its long-range planning recognizes the importance of local heritage and the built environment. Historic preservation plans are typically updated every 10 years as a best practice, just to make sure we're planning for the next decade's activities and priorities. A plan identifies and articulates community preservation goals, lets current and future property owners know how the community intends to grow, provides clarity about the purpose of the local preservation ordinance, educates the public about the community's history, creates an agenda for future preservation work, and creates a way to measure preservation's progress. Preservation plans also encourage economic development and strengthen political understanding of historic preservation processes. These were the main goals for our project, beginning with a background review of the existing materials and ordinances in the city, engaging with the community. And then when we were there in February, we conducted a limited windshield survey of the community, and then working towards plan development. So the background review involved an extensive review and assessment of the city of Moberly's history and the existing preservation program, economic factors, administrative organization, and tools for preservation. All the current and former city programs, policies, documents, and procedures related to preservation were reviewed and analyzed. Existing plan documents, the Historic Preservation Code of Ordinances, and prior recommendations from the state were studied. We reviewed which properties and districts have been documented and designated as historic and mapped those out within the community. And we looked at which community organizations support the city's preservation efforts and how they provide support. We assessed progress related to the existing historic preservation ordinance, the 2010 plan, and recommendations from the State Historic Preservation Office, who regularly reviews the city's work. We also looked at the 2040 Moberly Comprehensive Plan to identify how historic preservation was already woven into that document. Next, we reached out to the community to learn about the public's thoughts and interests related to historic preservation. We collaborated with the city to identify key stakeholders and individuals within those groups who might be willing to be interviewed. We conducted those interviews with about 10 key stakeholders, and then we had an online survey questionnaire, which hopefully you had an opportunity to participate in. That measured the extent to which the trends and ideas that we were hearing from the stakeholders were reflected across the larger community as well. Then we had an in-person community meeting in February. It provided an overview and introduction to the project, and we had it was a working meeting where we had some activities to really try to drill down and identify strengths and opportunities for preservation in Moberly. While we were in town, we drove around the city to understand better its patterns of development, neighborhood identities, and to enable us to make more detailed recommendations for future survey documentation and landmarking efforts. So based on the background review, community engagement, and the windshield survey, we developed the strategic plan. We identified 4 main goals for historic preservation. 1 is recommitting to and strengthening the city's preservation program. 2 was improving downtown Moberly. 3, support historic preservation outside of downtown. And 4, engage the community. The preservation plan provides a 10-year framework for achieving these goals and includes objectives and strategies for achieving each goal. So this graphic here kind of illustrates how the strategies and objectives support accomplishing the goal. We're going to walk you through each of the 4 goals and their objectives. There's a lot of different strategies for each objective in the plan, so we're just going to provide an example to kind of illustrate how this framework works. And these are not listed in any order of priority. Goal 1, is not necessarily the most important goal, and the objective 1 of goal 1 is not necessarily the most important objective. So the first goal relates to continuing to build the city's historic preservation program. They've made great strides in developing the preservation program since 2003, and we've identified some additional opportunities to recommit to prior goals and objectives and ways to strengthen the program even further. We've identified 4 objectives for this goal. Objective A is providing personnel, funds, and resources necessary to support the program over the next 10 years. Objective B is utilizing the existing historic preservation ordinance to its full powers. Then improving the public's access to information about historic preservation. And then D is encouraging rehabilitation and reuse of historic properties while discouraging demolition. So again, each objective has multiple strategies. We're not going to go through all of those. You can see them in the plan, but here's an example strategy for objective C. It would be hosting an informational training about the downtown design and district's certificate of appropriateness process. You could record the session and post it online so that others could come back and view that on their own time, and to save staff time from explaining that process to multiple people. The goals, objectives, and strategies are presented in a table format. So in the table, we indicate whether each strategy is a continuation of prior planning efforts or State Historic Preservation Office review recommendations, and which ones are new that are recommended by our staff. In this case here, this is a new recommendation. We've also provided cost estimates, recommended implementation timelines, and the personnel and partners needed to execute the strategies. The city should continue to leverage historic preservation grants as much as possible. And so we've also indicated where a strategy could be a good fit for grant funding. Our second goal is improving downtown Moberly. Members of the public made it clear that a healthy historic downtown is important to them, and the city's committed to preservation of downtown in previous planning initiatives like the 2040 Comprehensive Plan. So this goal expands upon that commitment with additional objectives and strategies. The three objectives here are supporting economic investment, supporting rehabilitation in line with historic preservation standards, improving the general character, and enlivening downtown. So here's an example strategy for Objective C, which is a specific recommendation to create a sense of place with lighting, historic district signage, appropriate street furniture, and plantings. The strategy is in line with the 2040 Comprehensive Plan objectives, and we recommended it as a short-term goal. And then it has a higher cost, which is indicated by the $3 signs, but it does have grant potential. So we've recommended that the city partner with the Chamber of Commerce and the CID on this work. Goal 3 is supporting historic preservation outside downtown. To date, most preservation efforts have focused on downtown. Although it's important to continue efforts there for sure, the city should begin to explore historic preservation opportunities outside of the downtown commercial core. So here's an example of the objectives. Identify and designate historic properties and district outside downtown, highlight and improve connections between key historical places. As a result of our limited windshield survey, we recommended a comprehensive citywide windshield survey. The goal of that survey would be to identify individual properties and districts that might have high potential to be eligible for local or national designation. We would recommend developing a historic narrative that describes major historical trends that occurred outside of downtown. It would address underrepresented histories, which have not been explored in previous surveys. And based on the results of the context that we would recommend being developed and this windshield survey, then the city could pursue more detailed documentation of properties with that high potential for designation. So then looking again at this framework, which identifies, is it in line with previous plans and initiatives? What's the timeline? How much does it cost? And who would be involved in executing this? In this case, the local partners would be a historic preservation consultant, the HPC, and city staff. So the final goal relates to getting more members of the community involved in the city's historic preservation initiatives. We learned that residents of Moberly believe it's important to document the city's history and to get younger people engaged in history and historic preservation. To that end, we've identified strategies to engage the public, particularly younger generations and existing community groups, to foster community identity and market study and expand the public's knowledge of Moberly's history. The strategy example here is recruiting a local college student with an interest in history or architecture to serve on the city's Historic Preservation Commission. This aligns with the State Historic Preservation Office recommendations to have folks with an interest and expertise in historic preservation on the commission. The timeline in this example is medium term, low or no cost, and the partners could be community college. The next section of the plan is describing how the plan should be maintained over time. So we're recommending annual review of the goals, strategies, and objectives by the Preservation Committee in the city for the next 10 years, as well as quarterly commission meetings about the status of the objectives. We've made recommendations about the general timing that we think these could be accomplished, but it's really up to the HPC to establish actions and the priority that they would like to take the direction and to assess the progress. We would recommend a public meeting in 5 years to update the public on the status of the plan, which has the 10-year horizon. And then the next planning cycle would begin no later than 2032. The plan document also includes resources that we wanted to mention today. The first is a list of local, state, and federal funding sources for historic preservation and rehabilitation. These are sources that individual owners, the city, or local groups could apply for. The second is Example Preservation Program web content from the city of San Antonio in Texas, which has a nice public-friendly historic preservation content. And we thought that that was a good example that the city of Moberly could draw some inspiration from. So our next steps are continued review of the first draft of the plan. This presentation will be posted online for those of you that couldn't tune in live. And then we've got a document for submitting comments. We will then address those comments and resubmit the next draft. The final plan is aimed to be published in August. So this slide illustrates how you can comment on the plan. We've got an online matrix hosted in Google Documents. So it's pretty easy to just type in what your comment is. You would indicate which page you're commenting on, the section and the line, your name, which is optional. You don't have to provide your name, and then your comment. And the document automatically saves while you're typing. So when you're done adding comments, all you need to do is close your browser when you're done. As a reminder, the deadline for the comments is May 23rd. And you can find a link to this comment matrix at the same link where the city is hosting the draft plan, or you can go to this shortened URL to get a direct link to there. So that's it. And I can't see if anybody has posted any questions in the chat, but if you have, we will get with the city to compile those and publish your response. All right.
Hold on, Emily.
Good morning, Emily. This is J.W. Ballinger.
Hi.
We had a meeting and we looked through the draft fairly carefully, I think. And I know we're not to the point of finality on this, but we think that there's just an awful lot of information there. And in any effort to try to sell this to the community, we think a summary or a shortened version of things we think we can accomplish out of that plan would be helpful. Do you think it's appropriate, or can we do that? Can we summarize with a brochure, for example?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, you know, we started out with a 3-page plan, and now we've got a plan that's rather large. And there are things that we will probably want to do, things that we can do, but there'll be some things we just don't have the staffing at city level or the expertise at the board or the historic preservation level to accomplish. So we want to make this as useful to the community as possible. So we thought a summary would be helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. We can make sure that there's a digestible executive summary, and then we could also make a separate document that's formatted and easy to digest, like a little handout or something.
That would be appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah. And then also as a reminder, this is a 10-year plan, so it may seem kind of overwhelming at the moment, but I think you guys will be set up for success to, you know, start working on these strategies now and accomplish them within 10 years.
As an additional question, everything that's in your report, is that something that's basically required by SHPO?
No, the SHPO doesn't have particular requirements for the preservation plan. It's pretty unique to each community, you know, based on what's working there and what we would recommend moving forward.
Thank you.
We're hoping to get comments back from the state pretty soon, so we'll be following up with them to see if they can provide comments on the same timeline as the public.
Okay, we don't have any comments at this time, so if we get some, we'll pass them along to you, Emily.
That sounds good.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time, and JW, thank you for attending, and Tom had to step out, so so we appreciate everybody being here.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.
All right, bye.